What's going on, everyone? Welcome back with week 2 games having wrapped up. You know what time it is. I'm coming at you with our week 3 waiver wire pickups. So let's get right into it. After a week full of injuries at the quarterback position, we kick it off here and we start yet again with a name in Josh Allen that was featured last week. Versus that Giants defense, he went for 253 yards in the air, 1 touchdown, and then also 21 yards on the ground with a rushing touchdown as well. So he definitely gave you success in week 2. And week 3 should be another favorable matchup versus the Cincinnati Bengals defense that was absolutely obliterated by Jimmy Garoppolo and the 49ers. And that's going to be a running theme for the Bengals. Look, they went ahead and made some upgrades in the offseason, mostly on the offensive side of things, but that defensive side is still a weak point. And Josh Allen, again, with all these injuries to these mainstream quarterbacks, Big Ben, Drew Brees, Josh Allen with his rushing abilities could be, again, a good streamer for a second week in a row. Next, we've got Jameis Winston, and probably a name that's not going to get a lot of love, and understandably so. Winston and the Bucs have been very underwhelming so far this season. Even in a victory versus Carolina, the Bucs just didn't look all that good. But guess what fixes all woes related to that this year in the NFL? It seems like it's a matchup versus the New York Giants, who have been absolutely helpless in these first 2 weeks. Winston went for 208 yards through the air and a passing touchdown versus the Panthers, but that defense had a lot more playmakers than that of the New York Giants, and I would expect Winston to be a nice dark horse streamer versus the Giants to go ahead and improve on the yardage in the air and on those passing touchdowns as well. The third and final quarterback on our list is Jimmy Garoppolo, who versus the Bengals torched them for 297 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception through the air. And now the 49ers get another favorable matchup versus the Big Ben-less Steelers. And unfortunately so for the Steelers, this team as a whole, not only offensively but defensively as well, is completely different without Roethlisberger starting at the quarterback position. With Rudolph under center, it's going to be a long day for that offense. It's going to keep that defense on the field for longer. It's going to get them tired. And Jimmy Garoppolo should see some success versus the Steelers, who have struggled the first 2 weeks defensively. Keep that in mind as well. I think he'll have another successful day. I don't think it'll be quite as good as what he did in week 2, but it should again get you close to 20 points on the week. Getting to our wide receivers, we start with Demarcus Robinson of the Chiefs. Now, last week we featured Mecole Hardman on our list. He had a very solid performance in week 2, but so did his running mate in Demarcus Robinson. 6 receptions for 172 yards and 2 touchdowns versus the Oakland Raiders. Now, albeit the week 3 matchup versus the Baltimore Ravens will be a lot tougher, but Patrick Mahomes and this Kansas City offense does not seem like it'll be slowing down anytime soon. I could see this game being very high scoring and very friendly for fantasy points. Patrick Mahomes will sling it around, and it sure seems like both Hardman and Robinson will have their fair share of opportunities to replace that Tyreek Hill production. The running backs for Kansas City a little bit banged up, so I anticipate Mahomes relying more so on those pass catchers. So if you're looking for another boom or bust guy that has a very high ceiling, Robinson could be that player. Next up, we've got Nelson Agholor of the Eagles, who this last week versus the Falcons had 8 receptions for 107 yards and a touchdown. And if not for a dropped touchdown that would have sealed most likely the victory for the Eagles late in that game, his stat line could have been a lot better. Now, there's an asterisk next to this inclusion because this was done without Alshon Jeffrey and Deshaun Jackson on the field for the Eagles for the majority of this game. So even though right now, at this point in time, Nelson Agholor will probably be a pretty popular name to go ahead and add if you need help at the wide receiver position, it's absolutely a name that you also need to keep an eye out for, more so for his teammates and the status of their health heading into Week 3's matchup versus the Detroit Lions, because if they both return, the ceiling will drop a little bit for Nelson Agholor. Continuing on, we have got James Washington of the Steelers. And I know you're saying to yourself, well, why would you include any Pittsburgh Steeler at this point in time after Big Ben was ruled out for the entire remainder of the season? Tough matchup versus the San Francisco 49ers, who have been pretty good defensively. And Washington only had 2 receptions for 23 yards last week. But this is more so an upside pickup that has some potential due to the chemistry of Rudolph and James Washington. They were teammates in college. They had success in the preseason. And I think this could be that leaping point for Washington to potentially get a hold of that wide receiver 2 position in Pittsburgh. I anticipate him to get peppered with targets. Even though the 49ers defense looks to be improved this year, they still gave up a bunch of yards versus guys like John Ross and Tyler Boyd last week. So I think James Washington could be a sneaky add moving forward as a potential flex for the remainder of the season if that chemistry between him and Rudolph stays true. Getting to our last wide receiver, we have got Golden Tate of the New York Giants. And obviously, up until this point, Golden Tate hasn't even played a single game yet in 2019. And he will still miss 2 more games as he's been suspended for substance abuse for the first 4 games this season. But this is the point in time where you want to go ahead and start looking at adding Golden Tate, because if you wait another week, it might start to be too late. So do yourself a favor, potentially invest a pick in him a little bit earlier prior to the suspension getting close to finishing up, because right now the Giants are just so bad that they are just airing out the football when it gets later in their respective games. And a lot of these wide receivers that really aren't household names are getting plenty of targets. And once Golden Tate returns, he should absolutely be on the receiving end of such attention, especially considering right now the concussion status of Sterling Shepard. So without Shepard there, it's pretty much Golden Tate and Evan Ingram as pass catchers. Once that suspension ends for Golden Tate, he could be a viable option for a volume play, especially in PPR formats moving forward. Moving on to our running backs, we start with the ageless one, Frank Gore, who last week had 19 rush attempts for 68 yards and a rushing touchdown. He also added 2 receptions for 15 yards, but more so for Frank Gore, it's all about those pure rushing attempts and yards on the ground. And the good news is the matchup for the Bills this week will be versus the Cincinnati Bengals, who defensively, like we said before when highlighting Josh Allen, have struggled this year. And even more so in favor of Frank Gore, Singletary went ahead and aggravated a hamstring in that game of Week 2's matchup versus the New York Giants. So Frank Gore's usage should go ahead and go up in this game. Now, obviously, Singletary's health is something to monitor as we go along. But with these hamstring issues for these running backs, it's something that you usually don't want to rush back from. So I anticipate Frank Gore will be the lead back even if Singletary suits up, and his usage should be pretty high versus a suspect Cincinnati defense. Next, we've got Peyton Barber, who in Week 2 versus a decent Carolina defense had 23 rush attempts for 82 yards and a rushing touchdown. After a disappointing Week 1, Peyton Barber was the featured back for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And right now, at least, it seems like he will be that moving forward. Obviously, it's not a slam dunk because I feel like this Buccaneers offense is still finding itself to some degree. But again, when it comes to a matchup that's as favorable as one that the Bucs have versus the New York Giants in Week 3, you want to go ahead and target these type of starts, especially at the running back position. If you've had injuries there, if you're just struggling in depth, or you need a decent flex with high upside, Peyton Barber can be that guy versus a Giants defense that has been getting absolutely roasted since Week 1 of the NFL started. The third and final running back on our list is Raheem Mostert of the 49ers, who this last week had 13 rushes for 83 yards on the ground, along with 3 receptions for 68 yards, along with a touchdown in that department 2. And even though Matt Breida is the featured guy for the 49ers, Mostert isn't a bad standalone flex option this week. More so a deeper waiver wire add than some of these other guys because he is more so in that backup role. But look, if anything happens to Matt Breida with all those other running back injuries for the 49ers, Mostert becomes a must start every week. And again, because of this favorable matchup versus the Pittsburgh Steelers, who will be without Big Ben, and that completely transforms the way they play offense, the way they play defense, I anticipate Mostert will get a lot of action in this game as well, especially if the 49ers go up early in this game. Mostert could very well be the featured back by the fourth quarter. So I like Mostert if you're really looking for that deeper waiver wire running back add with a higher ceiling potential due to favorable matchup usage. Next, getting to our tight ends, we start with Jameis Winston of the Cowboys, who it's been 2 weeks and he's had a touchdown in every single contest for the Cowboys. This last week, 4 receptions for 25 yards and a touchdown. Now look, those yardage numbers aren't impressive. The receptions, you'd want to see them be higher. But the fact of the matter is, week 3's matchup versus the Miami Dolphins that has given up over 100 points combined in the first 2 weeks is just too good to pass up. Jameis Winston should have an opportunity to go ahead and score a touchdown here. I'd be shocked if the Cowboys don't put up 30 points on the Miami Dolphins. You almost expect every single starter to get in the end zone, if not once, then multiple times. I think Jameis Winston will have his opportunities. Even though he is a touchdown-dependent tight end, this is absolutely, if there were ever a matchup to exploit that opportunity in, it would be week 3 versus the Miami Dolphins. The second and final tight end on our list is Chris Herndon of the New York Jets, who, similar to Golden Tate, finds himself suspended for the first 4 games, but we want to go ahead and get his name out there so that you could potentially add him pretty easily a little bit earlier before he returns and exploit what could be a successful return, because we saw the chemistry he had with Sam Darnold and success he had late last season, but also he could be a security blanket for whatever quarterback starts for the New York Jets if Sam Darnold is still out. If not, again, with guys like Quincy Enunwa out for the year, there should be some opportunities there, and at this point, it doesn't hurt to go ahead and add him. It won't cost you much. Many people won't be looking to add Chris Herndon this early on. If you're someone that has gone through the Hunter Henry injury or someone that's getting frustrated with O.J. Howard, taking a flyer on Chris Herndon could be a good idea. And finally, getting to our defenses, we start with the Dallas Cowboys, who we feature, who we highlight because of that incredible matchup versus the Miami Dolphins. And if you've been keeping up with the Dolphins these last 2 weeks, well, you know how well opposing fantasy defenses have performed versus them. Honestly, we're going to be highlighting whatever defense goes up versus the Miami Dolphins, whatever week it is, because just in week 2, the New England Patriots defense gave you 30 plus points in fantasy, and the Dallas Cowboys can go ahead and probably get you, without a doubt, at least 20 plus points, something close to that you would expect if the trends continue after these first 2 weeks. This Dallas Cowboys defense, if it's available off of waivers, I'd go ahead, put in a claim, and it could potentially be the highest scoring player on your starting roster if they get probably what's expected between 15 and 20 points. Next, we've got the Minnesota Vikings, who face a very friendly matchup at home versus the Oakland Raiders. And a couple things that you have to be encouraged by with the Minnesota Vikings, even in a tough matchup that they lost versus the Green Bay Packers after giving up a decent amount of points early on to Aaron Rodgers and the Packers. They held strong for the remainder of the game, and they really made the Packers work for it. And I think that success defensively that we saw in week 1, that we saw in parts of week 2, will translate to week 3 versus the Raiders. This Vikings offense is on another level. I anticipate them to come out fast and put up a bunch of points on the Raiders. They're going to force the Raiders to throw a bunch, and that defense is going to shut down the aerial attack, probably the rushing attack as well. And I anticipate the defense to have a good day, get you somewhere between 10 and 15 points in week 3. Continuing on, we have got the Seattle Seahawks, who have a home game versus the New Orleans Saints. And normally we wouldn't be highlighting this team, but things absolutely change when your starting quarterback, future Hall of Famer Drew Brees, has been ruled out for at least 6 weeks. And unfortunately for the Saints, that is the case here. Now, even though they have some really good offensive weapons, Michael Thomas, Alvin Kamara, this team isn't the same offensively without Drew Brees. We saw it in week 2. And I do think Seattle, with that home field advantage, they've got some pieces. They've come out nice and strong these first 2 weeks. Got a decent defensive line. Will be able to go ahead and stop the New Orleans Saints, get a victory, force several mistakes as I anticipate them to play with the lead for the majority of this game, and get you a couple of turnovers, whether it's interceptions or forced fumbles. The fourth and final defense on our list is the San Francisco 49ers, who have got a matchup versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. And again, normally we wouldn't highlight this matchup defensively especially, but similar to the Seattle Seahawks, when the opposing quarterback is not starting, in this case future Hall of Famer Big Ben Roethlisberger, you absolutely target the opposing defense, as is the case with the 49ers, who quietly have had some pretty good defensive outings the first 2 weeks versus the Bucs, then versus the Bengals. I think this continues versus the Pittsburgh Steelers, even though they might give up a bunch of yardage just because how much the Steelers will likely be airing it out if they go down early in this game. I anticipate several turnovers for the 49ers defense that will get you some nice points. So with that, we finish up our waiver wire targets for week 3. And as always, let me hear it in the comment section. Did you agree, disagree with these mentioned? Are there other guys that you would also add to this list? And also, let me hear your start and sit questions. I will do my best to answer them all. And in the meantime, if you enjoyed, make sure to like, subscribe, and I will see you guys in future videos.